The D&D experience is built on the pillars of exploration, social roleplay, and combat. Combat is by far the most easily recognizable to the core experience. It is where most of the game's rules and abilities apply. When the players face a combat encounter, the Dungeon Master has to set up the enemies they will face. If the enemies are too strong, the players could lose their characters and the campaign could come to an end. If the enemies are too weak, there will be no tension to the fighting, and your friends will wonder why you wasted an hour of their Saturday night on mopping up goblins. The pressure falls on the Dungeon Master to find the right middle ground between these two extremes. This is balance. If you want to have a good time playing D&D, you must balance your encounters. But what if I told you that was a lie? In 2 previous videos, I talk about monsters in D&D. I recommend you watch this one if you haven't already. And as for this one, it's much longer and much sillier, but you can catch the intro and the conclusion and see what I'm going for. Did your homework? Okay. So in those videos, I conclude that I would allow a well-intentioned player to roll up a character with any monster as their species. I recognize this is a bold claim, but I stand by it. How, in all the multiverse, does that work? How does a party consisting of a human fighter, a flameskull wizard, a gelatinous cube ranger, and a Tarrasque rogue remain balanced with each other, and how do I as a dungeon master provide suitable combat encounters that feel balanced against all of them? It makes no sense. It cannot be done. Or can it? To answer these questions, we need to ask, what is balance? This is a good question, and I'm going to analyze it through the perspective of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, but I hope some of my conclusions will apply to whatever your favorite tabletop role-playing game is. What are the mechanics of balance? Can we look at other pieces of media to determine better methods of ascertaining balance? What do the books say? Can I provide facts and relevant examples to show you the way? And can we have a good time while we're doing it? Get ready for some memes and some GIFs. I'm going to talk about One Piece. I'm going to talk about Berserk. I'm going to talk about professional wrestling. We are going to find the flavor of balance. Maybe balance does matter, but maybe it doesn't. Let's dig deeper. Maybe you didn't know, but several Americans enjoy sports ball. These competitive athletics involve 2 teams competing in games with strict rule sets. And one might assume that a more entertaining sports ball event would be between 2 evenly matched teams, but that might not be so. I'm told it is enjoyable to watch the underdog with lesser stats triumph over the presumed victor, and also enjoyable to watch the overpowered team you favor trounce a far weaker opponent to display dominance. This goes to show... You know what? I clearly don't understand anything about sports, and I'm not going to pretend to with an analogy. So let's talk about something more geeky. In Super Mario Bros., your character progresses through levels encountering various enemies, traps, and jumping puzzles. As you progress, the enemies become more frequent and more difficult. Mario himself doesn't get stronger. He gets temporary power-ups that are as present at level 1 as they are in the endgame. You, as the player, are expected to get better as you go along. This differs from popular modern single-player video games as well as D&D, where the character's progress is rewarded with experience that grants them a level up that gives them gradually more and better abilities. Fast forward to Skyrim. Skyrim doesn't have a linear progression of stages. It is an open-world sandbox with several linear quest lines and very, very many radiant side quests. Your Dragonborn will level up, and as they do, so does the world around them. This makes sense from a game perspective. There would be no tension in late-game enemies if they remained the same as they did from level 1. But from a story perspective, it's nonsensical that the same Draugr in the same dungeon will provide a wildly different encounter depending on what time you find it. But this is how a lot of D&D games work. As your party progresses, they are supposed to happen upon increasingly more threatening enemies. A level 12 party won't see a goblin, or if they do, it will be 20 goblin commanders. Through single-player video games, we can begin to see the cracks in the way we typically think about player versus enemy balance. But it's not the only kind of balance. Mortal Kombat is a series of two-player fighting games that begin their run in arcades. There are a number of characters to choose from, each wielding different movesets. Casual kids popping quarters into the machine might pick Sub-Zero because you think he's the coolest, or Sonya Blade because you're the sister and she's the only girl character. But when we look at serious players or the competitive scene, your character selection starts to really matter. If Scorpion's moves are 10% more likely to win you the match, you will always see Scorpion in the leaderboard, and Kano will never get played. In D&D, it is possible to engage in player versus player combat, but it is highly unlikely and at most tables pretty frowned upon. But the balance between characters still matters. All of the player characters are meant to act as a team using their own movesets to defeat the enemies together. But this still brings up a problem. If I'm playing Scorpion and you're playing Kano, and my character build succeeds 10% more than yours, I am going to have a better time. I am going to have more of an impact on the game, and you might just feel bad about your own lessened impact, even if it's just 10%. So the balance between player characters cannot be ignored. This problem fully expresses itself in modern multiplayer games like Marvel Rivals. Rivals already has a pretty impressive roster of characters split between damaging duelists, tanky vanguards, and supportive strategists. While each role is well defined and you should probably have a well-blended party composition if you're going to win your match, the characters within each role are varied enough to offer different playstyles catering to player preferences, and that inevitably means balance problems. Black Widow might be your favorite Marvel character, but in Rivals, she underperforms. Competitive players would almost never pick her, and casual players who are aware of the meta, the most effective tactic available, will flame you in chat when you lock in Black Widow as your character. This kind of balance issue was taken to the extreme in Overwatch. At one point, Blizzard released a new hero named Brigitte, a support character with melee attacks that healed nearby allies and an ultimate that provided a massive boost of armor to the whole team. Because of her melee heals, Brigitte encouraged her team to play close together, which in turn encouraged close-range characters like Reinhardt, Zarya, and Reaper to be picked. It might be easy to playtest and balance one character's abilities, but things get harder when the whole internet gets to play around with different ability combos with all the other characters. One thing led to another, and when professional players took to the stage, the GOATS meta was born. Matches frequently featured two teams both built around Brigitte and three tanks smashing against each other's bloated health pools while healing, failing to score kills and failing to push the objective. This wasn't fun to watch or fun to play, but fielding a team without GOATs into a team using GOATs would lose you the game, so you were pressured as a support player to always run Brigitte. For better or worse, games like Overwatch and Marvel Rivals are an ongoing experience with constant developer feedback. Black Widow can be buffed, Brigitte can be nerfed, and these things start to achieve a better balance, but there will always be problems. D&D has always had similar problems. There is a stark power divide between marshals and casters, and certain builds that try to achieve the best of both worlds can dominate the game in the hands of an optimancer who knows what they are doing, creating a potentially overpowered Gish. Unlike Overwatch, once you buy your D&D book, there's no changing the text. Yes, there can be reprinted errata and sage advice found online, but Jeremy Crawford can't break into your house with a Sharpie and change the rules. The Twilight Cleric will forever remain a busted subclass, and it is possible to build a party around the Twilight Cleric that constantly casts darkness on its enemies while utilizing features like Devil's Sight and blind fighting to gain advantage on blinded foes in every single combat encounter. Currently, the GOATS meta of D&D is the Cheese Grater, party builds utilizing some combination of area of effect spells like Spike Growth with a speedy monk grappling enemies and dragging them back and forth through the AoE. For all of 5e's rules and subsystems, its mechanical balance is kind of a mess. There are countless videos and threads breaking down which subclasses, feats, and spells are better than others, and they have the math and the actual play experience to back it up. So what about the flavor? D&D is more than just the mechanics. The story you and your friends tell will lead to more interesting encounters than math problems determined by stats and ability selection, and that's a good thing. How can we see this flavor expressed in other media? Hey, let me give a shot at this sports ball thing. I may not know many sports, but I have seen a lot of sports movies. Like the one where Sam Gamgee really wants to play football, but the clerics at the religious academy won't let him play football because he's a hobbit, I guess? Unclear. Well, eventually he does get to play the football, and it's great because of reasons. Or how about Cool Runnings, where a bunch of Jamaicans enter the Olympics as a bobsled team, and that's funny because they're Jamaicans, I guess? They get to bobsled too, and even though they don't win, they get to prove that anyone can play the sport they want to play. Maybe that's problematic. Okay, one more. How about the woke 2024 football film Remember the Titans, where a mixed-race football team with a token gay have to prove that they can work together and win at football? Just kidding. That was actually made in the year 2000 and every conservative dad loves it. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, balance. I gotta stop trying to make sports analogies work, so let's talk about wrestling. Yep. Wrestling audiences get the fact that the matches are staged. It's kind of what elevates the entertainment and makes it worth watching week to week as narratives unfold. You might say it's several combat encounters stringed together to form a campaign. The producers and writers making the matches fill the role of the dungeon master, and if their fights are going to work, there needs to be balance. The actual mechanics of the fights are important, but they're secondary. Two charismatic and technically skilled fighters can sell a middling narrative, but if there's absolutely no flavor to the fight, all of their impressive moves won't prove to be memorable by the time the next fighters are in the ring. Roman Reigns used to be the strong and silent member of a party known as The Shield, but the producers began breaking him out as a solo star. The problem is that Roman was still a little under-leveled for the fights he would win, meaning that the audiences didn't believe his victories were earned. From what I can tell, he seems to be well respected now, but that took years of work and a major reformatting of his persona. If you, as a dungeon master, keep allowing your party to defeat powerful foes beyond their ken, they will not earn their experience points. They may be called heroes, but they will not feel like heroes. The Undertaker is a wrestling legend, the Dead Man, a fearsome high-level undead complete with lore and spells. From 1991 to 2013, The Undertaker was the big bad evil guy of The Streak, a series of WrestleMania fights where he went undefeated. The narrative established that no one could take this monster down, but at some point the streak had to come to a close, and in 2014 The Undertaker was pinned by Brock Lesnar. If you know nothing about wrestling, it might be believable that this huge guy could take on this other huge guy. They probably have comparable stats and levels that would make for a balanced encounter. But what The Undertaker has that Brock Lesnar doesn't is the narrative power of the streak. Because of this lore known by the audience, it places undue strain on the encounter so that Brock Lesnar bears an incredible burden of proof as the one who broke the streak. It would suck if your level 13 party was low on hit points after their 5th encounter in a dungeon, and they get ambushed and killed by nameless wandering trolls. It would also suck if your level 5 party got the win over Lord Soth. Victories in combat should have narrative weight, otherwise something is off about the flavor of your balance. If you haven't ever thought about professional wrestling but you know about D&D, I bet 20 gold pieces you have also heard of Andre the Giant. Andre was a wrestler, but usually when he takes to the ring, the outcome is a foregone conclusion. There is very little drama to be found in the audience questioning if Andre will win, so instead the producers have to change the stakes. The question is not, will the opponent lose? The question is, how long will they last against Andre? By putting on a good show, they can still earn the crowd's respect. This is a common tactic utilized by many DMs. You can't have every encounter be about fighting to the death. Sometimes the party will have to run away, or stop a ritual before time runs out, or hold back the demon prince until the portal can be closed. The flavor of the fight is in your hands, and it matters just as much, if not more than, the mechanics. In shonen anime, balance is commonly determined by power scaling. Based on which characters have beaten other characters in fights throughout the series, we can determine the balance of the present encounter. Plenty of stories do this, but none more so than the sprawling manga odyssey, One Piece. Each arc, Luffy and his crew go to a new island which will always have some variation of a small army of minions, a collection of mini-boss lieutenants, and of course, a big bad evil guy. The minions provide no challenge. The lieutenants will be fun fights usually relegated to the non-Luffy members of the Straw Hats, and the big bad evil guy will usually be defeated in a final encounter after a preliminary match where Luffy is knocked down but gets back up again. Each time we rinse and repeat with a new island, the enemy is stronger to reflect the new abilities Luffy has gained. This linear progression is most literally portrayed in the gears system. Luffy unlocks progressively higher gears to increase the strength of his gum powers as he faces down tougher enemies. There's also bounties. In One Piece, pretty much everyone is a pirate with a bounty, and at this point there are even marines with bounties placed on them by an organized pirate faction. These bounties would at first appear to be an in-universe power scaling system similar to the scanners in Dragon Ball Z, but they are actually closer to a narrative tool. Some characters have low bounties but are actually very capable. Others have high bounties but can be easily defeated with the right moves. The bounties set the expectations for a fight, but it is not the final answer on the outcome. Another example of the numbers not determining balance comes with Code Geass. Code Geass is a story of rebellion, the so-called terrorist Black Knights of Japan taking on the much larger and more powerful empire of Britannia. In most encounters Lelouch faces, the audience is explicitly told the number of mechs and infantry on each side. We know what abilities and tech each side holds, we know what chess pieces are on the board, and so we can understand that in pretty much every case Lelouch is outmatched. And yet, Lelouch wins almost every time, because he knows how to use his pieces better than the enemy. There is an old-school Renaissance way of thinking that believes monsters should always be dangerous. They should always be more than a match for the player characters, and it is up to the players themselves to use clever tactics to overcome their foes. Code Geass's flavor of balance reflects this school of thought. A fair fight is boring, but a fight where the heroes are outmatched and succeed anyway is incredible. And then there's Berserk. Guts definitely gets level ups, he gets gear, and he gets allies as the story continues. The enemies he faces in the early story are miles behind the kinds of enemies he is facing by the end, but the chapter-to-chapter progression is far from linear. Sometimes, Guts faces a bunch of mooks, and there's no way the audience thinks he will lose, but it's fun to see him let loose and slice up a mob of dudes. Sometimes, Guts faces a truly challenging opponent, and while we know deep down that Guts will win, we are able to suspend our disbelief and be impressed by exactly how Guts will win this fight. And sometimes, quite frequently, Guts crosses paths with an enemy that is far beyond the abilities of himself and his allies. He has to outlast this enemy to escape and fight another day. This means that there is a lessened sense of mechanical balance to the encounters. The enemies that Guts faces are determined by the story rather than by what level he should be facing right now. And this is how I aim to run a lot of my own sessions at this point. What enemies make sense to be in this location at this time? What comes up on the random table? What enemies do I, myself, or my players find cool to show up next regardless of their power level? This method completely tosses out the mechanics of balance and goes full flavor. But is that the real solution? We've already talked about how classic role-playing depends more on the player's ability to strategize rather than the comparative power level of the enemies they face. Old-school dungeon design uses predetermined enemies in specific rooms combined with more randomized wandering monsters to lay out the dungeon the players explore through. Dungeons are rarely linear, so which enemies are fought and how frequently they are fought is determined by the party's decisions in mapping and exploring the dungeon. This is parodied in the popular board game Munchkin. In Munchkin, each player takes on the role of a D&D style adventurer, gaining levels, traits, and loot as they progress through the dungeon and make it to the end first. Cards are drawn to determine what monster they fight. There is no dungeon master and no balance. The monster card you draw is completely at random. And it is possible to run a dungeon or an urban adventure or an overland campaign with a similar ethos, using only random tables to determine the next encounter and forcing the party to decide if they have the resources and the power to take on a given encounter. But this is far from the typical experience. Fast forward to 5th edition. In 5e D&D, the Dungeon Master is expected to present combat encounters to the players using an enemy's challenge rating, or CR. The idea is that a CR3 monster should be a suitable challenge for a party of 4 level 3 adventurers. You can adjust the CR based on how many players are at the table or how deadly you want the encounter to be, but in general, you should be staying within a CR range close to the level attained by your party. This has problems. Enemies with the same CR are not made equally. Player characters with the same level are not made equally. There are always factors to consider, like what magic items the party is carrying, what damage types they have access to, what hirelings and NPCs they have with them, and the environment or layers they fight in, just to name a few. It all amounts to too many variables to be covered by just one number. I don't hate CR. I think it's a decent guide, especially if you are a new DM. But I think the issue that a lot of DMs start to have by around their second campaign is noticing how unreliable CR really is because they think it's a baking recipe. Baking is a science. It relies on precise measurement, timing, and temperature to get everything perfect. So when the recipe says you need 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, you had better not put in 1 tablespoon. This is not what CR is. CR is more like a recipe for cooking that calls for a pinch of salt. It's going to take a trained hand to know exactly how much salt you need for the particular cut of steak you are cooking today, and approximately how long you need to sear the steak on each side before placing it in the oven for a time that feels just right. The best DMs are less like bakers and more like chefs. The problem is that when you're just starting out, the steak recipes you're looking up will get close to the desired effect, but you won't get the feel for the intricacies of perfect design until years of experience. Except that there is a baking recipe for perfect encounter balance presented in the new 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. And I'm going to take you step by step through this easy system. Step 1 is choosing a difficulty: low, moderate, or high. Low should have no casualties. Moderate might knock down 1 or 2 characters if they're not careful, and high might kill a character if they aren't thinking tactically. Step 2 is determining your XP budget. See, all you do is cross-reference the party's level with the desired encounter difficulty. Multiply the number in the table by the number of characters in the party to get your XP budget for the encounter. Step 3 is where we spend our budget. Every creature has an XP value in its stat block, so we can use that figure to deduct from our budget. Here's some handy little examples. See, it's easy. By the way, we'll need to adjust the figures if there are many creatures. Also, if there are adjustments from die rolls, that's an interesting inclusion. Oh, and maybe we have some ZR0 creatures that are worth 0 XP. That will alter the calculations. Ooh, and watch out for having too many stat blocks like in example 1. Also, watch out for powerful creatures. Those will really throw off this system. As an addendum, I've noticed that most smart D&D YouTubers mention we should pay attention to the action economy, so we'll need to balance the scales in that regard. And if I can interject, one of my personal tricks as a professional DM, when time management counts, I like to estimate approximately how many rounds an encounter will last by comparing each side's health pool to how much maximum damage they can deal in 1 round. It takes some time and you'll need access to your party's character sheets, but it's just simple addition. See, we can make this work, you guys. Perfect recipe for balance right here. All you have to do is... Ah! Hey, so I realized I may actually know one thing about sports ball from personal experience. When I was around 10 years old, my dad would take me to local minor league baseball games. He would give me this little note card and a pencil and show me how to keep score. That was my job when we went to the game. You keep track of every pitch, and at the end of the game, you have a nice little record of everything that happened. The only problem is that this is my only real memory of those games. Staring down at a scorecard, trying to get everything just right because I didn't want to let my dad down. And that's the exact same feeling I get when I try to meticulously balance my encounters. I work so hard to get everything right for my players, but I've stripped down the hobby I love to a stack of numbers, alienated from the stories I care about, the monsters I want to run, and the people I want to have fun with. On the one hand, I appreciate that my dad took me to those games. Not everyone has a dad willing to take them out to ball games, or take the extra time to teach them sports math. I was probably a bored little kid, and keeping score gave my 10-year-old brain something to do. Keeping track of a player's stats in some way probably gave me the background to be able to jump into Pathfinder in college and immediately understand how stats influenced my character. But on the other hand, I kind of wish I just got to have a good time going to the ball game with my dad. When I'm running D&D for my friends, I don't want the experience to be about how perfectly I arranged the numbers just right. I want to remember the good time I had with friends at the table. And I do remember vividly one time when my dad took me to a Harlem Globetrotters game. That was fun. That was epic. And it was totally unbalanced. One of my absolute best professional D&D campaigns came from a week-long D&D summer camp with children. I was running an adventure in Theros, and by the end of the game, the players came face to face with the evil king, mask off after sending them on a journey to slay a Medusa who was actually one of the good guys. They had failed as a result of multiple poor decisions, and now they had to either join the evil king or die facing an overpowered opponent and his posse of guards. What did the party of 12-year-olds do? They chose to fight. They chose for their characters to die, for the story to end. Except that it didn't end. Next week of camp, they came back to Theros. They made new characters with connections to the old ones, investigating the evil king so that they could eventually triumph over him and avenge their slain characters. I made a completely unbalanced encounter, and without a doubt made something far more memorable for those kids as they grew in their role-playing journey. That just about covers the balance between the party and their enemies, but what about the balance between the player characters themselves? What happens when a player wants to play a Twilight Cleric and you know the subclass is overpowered? What happens when 3 players made casual characters with strong skill and social expression, and 1 player made an optimized combat powerhouse? How do you find balance between these players and run a satisfying game that doesn't allow one person to outshine the others? It is not your job as Dungeon Master to rebalance the entire player options list, but surely something must be done. And when there are already glaring issues in inter-party balance, why would you take my suggestion of allowing one player to play a Tarrasque? What is the solution? Well, that's kind of my whole point. Imbalance has always existed. Offering a Tarrasque and a gelatinous cube as player options certainly takes things to an extreme, but as a matter of fact, it does not introduce something that was not already present. An 18th level wizard is miles above an 18th level rogue, but people still choose the 18th level rogue because they enjoy the fantasy that the high level martial provides. My own highest level character is Thurisdes, a 16th level multi-class build with Totem Barbarian and Battlemaster Fighter elements expressed as the ultimate worshipper of the Pathfinder god Gorum. And I had an amazing time with her, even when the Halfling Cleric of Caden Kailan had to regularly use restoration spells to fix whatever terrible magic debuff happened to Thurisdes that I was not prepared for. What then is to stop you from having fun playing your gelatinous cube because you think oozes are neat and you wanted to play one rather than fight one? I have thought up a ton of ways to balance the gelatinous cube and the Tarrasque. One method is to strip them down to their base forms like any other species presented in the 2024 PHB. Another method is to offer level scaling, where the gelatinous cube gets all of its abilities but gets to start at level 8, while the Tarrasque keeps all of its abilities but only starts at level 2. And you can go that route. You can take the time to fine-tune those options until they are, as you see, balanced. But for me, fuck it. Fuck it. Fuck it. Let them both play their characters and see what happens. It will be far more interesting than trying to find the perfect balance between everybody. In my early D&D days, me and my buddies all loved the Spartacus TV show, so my friend naturally had the idea to run a campaign where we were all gladiators. To reflect the different backgrounds we came in with before we were captured as slaves, we rolled our levels randomly. While other players had levels 4, 5, and 7, I rolled a 2. This would seem like a recipe for a bad time, but I had a great time. I was provided with an interesting challenge, and rather than trying to build a martial fighter that would try and fail to earn favor in the arena, I built a scheming sorcerer that weaseled his way into the good graces of the nobles with subterfuge and enchantment spells. I still had to fight in the arena, but I maneuvered myself to always be paired with the level 7 guy, so I stood a chance. This wound up being a fun little campaign where everyone had a good time despite obvious and intentional imbalance. And there is the factor of freedom of choice. In a well-worded response to my tier list video, someone asked how I would approach equipment on a character playing a Flameskull. Good question. My answer is that I simply wouldn't give them equipment, other than a shiny helmet. By selecting the Flameskull, the player has already informed me that they have little to no interest in carrying any equipment. Is that wild? No, not at all. Any player selecting a monk has already informed you that they have no interest in armor, and only half an interest in weapons. Ditto for wizards that don't take a multiclass to try to be a gish. Paladins and clerics can take on performative acts of faith to shun certain weapons. People play Skyrim on weaponless runs or full pacifist playthroughs. When one player chooses a Tarrasque, they have just given you valuable information about what they want from the experience, and by selecting anything other than a Tarrasque, every other player has informed you something unique about what they want. That's great, play into that. Spend your time trying to cater to those desires rather than tinkering over scales and budgets to find the exact perfect balance. What about when the party faces down monsters? Fuck it! No, don't! Maybe fuck it gently. What I said in the intro still stands to some degree. You don't want to waste time on a walk in the park, and you don't want to curb stomp your party without reason. But there can be reasons on both sides. I regularly put mobs of mooks in front of my parties using the 4th edition minion rules. Give your enemies 1 HP each and watch as your party has fun playing out their power fantasies mowing down a ton of enemies. It can be a good time if used sparingly. One of my best campaigns is still the Berserk D&D campaign I cataloged on this channel, and one of the best fights was the Zod fight I lifted verbatim from the source material. Zod is not meant to be a fair fight for Guts, and it wasn't a fair fight for my party either. They recognized that both in-game and in the metagame, yet the resulting session was extremely tense and memorable. My solution for encounter balance ultimately follows the path of Berserk. Place down the monsters that make sense to be there at that point in the story. Underpowered, overpowered, or somewhere in between doesn't matter. Let the story unfold no matter what. If you are spending hours comparing health pools and action economy like I have done in the past, that is completely doable and you are welcome to it. But I'm offering you a way out. You are trying to push your mind to bend the spoon. There is no spoon. Once you realize that the illusion of balance isn't there, you will be free to create to your heart's content, while your mind thrives in the moment, reacting to the decisions of your party and the roll of the dice. Will they work together to change their plans and run away from Zod? Will they feel guilt at mowing down the village of goblins, wondering what drove them to this hopeless end? In my own humble opinion, either of these options are better than your players walking away from your game saying, "Yeah, that was pretty fair, I guess, huh?" So what is my advice? What is the true sight I grant to you? Does it end at just saying fuck it? Not exactly. I am having more fun with my games the less I rely on scripting and the more I rely on improv, but that requires years of honing your skills as a chef. I want you to be an efficient home cook that can make dishes better than I could after my first 3 years spent haphazardly homebrewing Pathfinder. That's kind of the whole point of this channel. Here's 3 things I want you to determine for your next combat encounter. I want this combat to be blank. Balanced is not a useful word. Terms like moderate or deadly, come close, but I want you to dig deeper into the situation you want to portray and the emotions you want to evoke. Try harrowing, try emboldening, try devastating. Now you're cooking. I can't tell you what word is right, and you probably shouldn't use the same word more than twice over the course of an adventure. You have the power to choose what is right for your game. The party needs to blank, or else blank. The party needs to win, or else they die is boring. The party needs to stop the sacrifice, or else the kingdom will have no princess is enticing. The party needs to slay the princess, or else the kingdom will perish. Now we're getting sexy. This brings the focus away from balance and back to the story and flavor, while also amplifying the stakes that make gameplay and mechanics matter. Challenge yourself to make every combat encounter a little different. I know you can do this. I'm on your side. Believe in the me that believes in you. Anything can happen. Yeah, there's no ad-lib input from you here. The dice are out of your control. You can set expectations and consent at session 0, but ultimately the actions of the players are out of your control. When you relinquish some of your control over the game, you will discover new possibilities of storytelling and gameplay that will not only be thrilling for your players, but fun for you. You deserve to have fun. DMing doesn't have to feel like work. Instead of accounting for your balance budget, try these 3 little guidelines instead. Or take 2 of them and swap in your own third. For all my true sight, I do not know your exact situation. You do. You have the power. You are not limited by what these books say. You are too smart not to know this because you are seeking out videos on YouTube to help you make a better game for your friends, and I think that's great. Give yourself some credit, and give yourself the freedom to go beyond the illusion of balance. Thank you for watching. If you found this video useful, consider sharing it with a friend. After all, sharing what we find cool about this hobby is what helps it thrive. You might not agree with me on everything I said, but if you walk away with just one new thing to try in your next game, this video is worthwhile for me to make. I hope your games give you some relief from the challenges you face in real life. Whether it's sports or tabletop role-playing games or even wrestling, we're all more alike than we are different. We're all trying to find good times, good friends, and meaning in a world that is frequently unfair. I hope you find that balance. Have a Nat 20 day. Bye-bye.